Today, we're going to be discussing Andy Warhol. Who is Andy Warhol? Andy Warhol, debatably one of the most influential artists of the 20th century, created some of the world's most widely recognized pieces of contemporary art. During the 1950s, companies grew rapidly and manufacturing improved so that commodities could be produced faster and cheaper than ever before. The United States' growing industrial nature inspired Warhol's mechanical method of creating his prints and using color. In doing this, he challenged modernism and modern artists of the time. His subject matter made people question the modernist perspective of what could be considered art. To further embody the industrial process he chose to imitate, Warhol called his art studio the factory. Here are some pictures of Warhol working in his factory. Look at all of those screen prints. Those must be his assistants. Andy Warhol's revolutionary style, including his unique process of mass-producing artwork and his break from traditional use of color, led him to be both praised and criticized for his experimentation in visual art, even in today's modern society. Along with Warhol's machine-like printing procedure, his unique use of colors in his artwork gives viewers of his paintings a similar feeling of disconnect. Warhol's prints are images of popular items such as Campbell's soup cans, or of famous celebrities. Do you recognize this celebrity? Muhammad Ali! And that's obviously not a soup can. Brillo pads, remember those? Color is often used in art to evoke a certain emotion from the audience. And before Andy Warhol and pop art, artists of the Impressionist and Fauvism movement used color to convey different sensations and emotions. Warhol, however, does not depict any sort of emotion or sensation through his choice of color. One of the elements that he does heavily focus on is space. Remember learning about that? Positive and negative space. Look at his treatment of the positive and negative space, and you'll notice in his artworks that negative space is just as important and powerful as his positive space. This is a really good lesson for all of you developing artists to take a look at his work and think about how he uses negative space, because a lot of young artists have a tendency to only be thinking about their subject, which is the positive space, right? And they don't give any consideration to how the space, the background, the negative space also contributes to an artwork. Instead, his paintings and prints follow various color schemes that are completely unrelated to any specific emotion. And one of the principles of design that Andy Warhol uses is repetition. You'll see that a lot. Who's this? Elvis Presley. So, color theory, pretty big deal. We've got complementary colors across the wheel. We've got triad. We've got split complementary. We've got double complementary, tetrad, and analogous. These are just different ways that you can combine the colors on the color wheel to get different effects. And of course, these are only 6. I mean, there's obviously an infinite number of ways that you could combine the colors. One of the 4 that we are going to focus on today is monochromatic. Mono means one. Chrome, color. So monochromatic is when you use tints and shades of just one color. And in this one, here's an example of the way Warhol uses scale and perspective also to resize his subjects. So these are the hues. They're just the basic colors themselves. Tints are when we add white. Tones are when we add gray, and shades are when we add black. So remember, monochromatic is when we're using tints and shades of just one color, and that's what those terms are. The second of the 4 schemes we're looking at today is complementary. This is when colors are used that are opposites of each other on the color wheel. Okay, so can you see in this image which 2 colors are complementary? That's right, red and green. And in this image, we've got kind of a purple and green. It's not an exact match to the wheel that we have here, but it's pretty close. The third of the 4 schemes is analogous. This is where you use 3 to 5 colors that are adjacent or next to each other on the color wheel. So when we look at this lovely painting print of Grace Jones, we see her red lipstick, we see the pink in the background, we see a little bit of these purples all the way up to blues. So monochromatic, using this side of the color wheel, or not monochromatic, sorry, analogous, using these colors and hues and shades and tints that are next to each other on the color wheel. Triadic, tri means 3, right? So this looks like some kind of, witchcraft happening here. This is where you use 3 colors that are evenly spaced on the wheel, thus giving you kind of that triangular thing happening. This is a really good example of seeing that red, blue, and yellow together. And who is this? Beethoven. Warhol did not seek to convey any sort of emotion by choosing these colors, but rather he decided to create this piece using a complementary color scheme. So his decisions were primarily, you can't really tell, but that's green. Hopefully it's turning out green. Looks a little bit pale for what I'm seeing, but you kind of get that this pink and this green are complementary colors. They're directly across from each other on the color wheel. Another example of the way Warhol used colors in his print titled Skull. This piece contains both a neutral, so neutral is kind of like, it doesn't have like red, blue, yellow in it. It has more like tans, colors that are just kind of lacking, they're desaturated. There's not a lot of color. There's not a lot of saturation in it. So anyway, yeah. It contains both neutral and monochromatic. Mono, right? One color scheme. So we're looking at black that has had white added to it to give you different values. And although it appears that the colors that were used in that last image were of the skull, because the colors were the dark colors associated with death and decay, it appears that maybe he was trying to connect that emotional side with death and decay via color, but he made several prints of the same image using different colors that an audience would not associate with that morbid feeling of death, like purples and pinks and baby blues. So you can see that he really is trying to take a theme like death and use color to disconnect from that theme. This shows how Warhol disassociated color with sensation and instead chose to use color as a way to simply mass produce similar pieces. This is apparent as well in his well-known prints of Marilyn Monroe, which he printed shortly after her death in 1962. Just as he did in his other pieces of artwork, Warhol simply used various color schemes, and more often than not, when it comes to the Marilyn series, multiple color schemes are used in one print. The colors he chose, however, are meant to accentuate the beauty and glamour associated with Marilyn Monroe's persona. Warhol was very much about beauty and glamour. So Andy Warhol was a man who created pieces that blurred the line between commercial and fine art. His industrial method and desire for mass production took the personality of the artist away from the work, leaving him disconnected from his art. And Warhol was successful in doing the same thing with his use of color by disassociating sensation with his colors and instead developed different color schemes for his artwork. Because of Warhol's ability to take risks and experiment with context and color, he remains a hugely influential artist after his death. So that brings us to our project, okay? Today in your project, you're going to demonstrate each of the 4 color schemes. So you are going to create like a quadratic artwork. And in your first quadrant, you're going to have a monochromatic color scheme. In your second quadrant, you're going to have a complementary. I wonder if we should do like the X and Y and say, you know, this is quadrant 1, 2, 3, and 4, because isn't that how it works in math? Well, if we were in the mathematical quadrant 1, it would be complementary. Quadrant 2, monochromatic. Quadrant 3, analogous. And quadrant 4, triadic. So always trying to integrate a little bit of math there. Fun times. Here's just an example. So here we go. We've got, in quadrant 1, our complementary colors. So we've got purple and yellow that are directly across from each other. Quadrant 2, we've got our monochromatic color scheme. So these are all just different various tints and shades of purple. And then in quadrant 3, we've got the analogous. So you're going to find like these reds and purples, hues here, and oranges all on the same side of the color wheel. And then triadic, you're going to see that triangle where the red, the yellow, and the blue are equally spaced from each other on the color wheel. So that's your assignment.